All right, here we go with section 5 and your focus question. As the election year 2016 began, all signs pointed to a victory for Hillary Clinton. She had a long political experience as Senator and Secretary of State, and many women were galvanized by the prospect of the nation's first female president. Clinton, however, faced a surprisingly robust challenge for the nomination from Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who wanted to strengthen and expand the regulatory policies and social safety net through such measures as universal health insurance and limits on corporations' political spending. Sanders spoke to widespread discontent with a society in which those who had plunged the country into economic crisis walked away scot-free, while taxpayers were left to pick up the pieces. Sanders accused Clinton of being part of a political establishment whose policies had widened the gap between the 1% at the top of the American economy and everyone else. One of the remarkable accomplishments of his campaign was to put the word socialism, long banished because of the Cold War, back into the vocabulary of American politics. With the united support of the Democratic Party establishment, Clinton secured the nomination. Meanwhile, Republicans fractured. 17 candidates, including governors, senators, and business leaders, presented themselves. Donald Trump, a New York real estate developer and television celebrity, shocked the country and the world by winning the Republican nomination. Trump's campaign played on both racial and gender resentment spawned by the growing diversity of American society and the rapid changes in gender roles, as well as the widespread sense, especially in areas suffering from the decline of manufacturing, that millions of ordinary Americans had been left behind by the recovery from the Great Recession. Trump did not speak much about freedom. He preferred to invoke slogans suggesting military and economic power, such as Make America Great Again and America First. Trump's policies marked a significant change in the national sense of purpose, inspired in part by weariness with the seemingly endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. No longer would the United States see itself as a global policeman with a mission to uphold freedom across the globe. Trump's political outlook had a strong racial component. When he announced his candidacy, Trump condemned immigrants from Mexico as murderers and rapists and galvanized supporters by promising to build a wall along the long border with Mexico to stop people from entering the country. He did not have a conventional campaign organization, spent little on television ads, and did not seek newspaper endorsements. He spread his views via social media and through large rallies. While presidential campaigns have always included scurrilous charges, never before had a major party candidate claimed that his predecessor was not an American citizen or promised to jail his opponent. Allegations that the 3 times married Trump had conducted numerous affairs, and the release of a video that showed him making lewd remarks about women and boasting about sexually harassing them, which would have destroyed the prospects of a more conventional candidate, did little to dent his support. Despite her long political experience, Clinton failed to address effectively widespread anxiety about the economic and cultural effects of globalization and large-scale immigration. Trump appealed successfully to nostalgia for a time when people of color and women knew their place and American manufacturing dominated the world economy. Trump realized that social media had transformed American politics, allowing him to communicate inexpensively with millions of followers. Like Obama in 2008, Trump promised change to a country unhappy with the status quo. Clinton seemed to represent more of the same. Throughout 2016, public opinion polls showed Clinton almost certain to be elected. But Trump triumphed in possibly the biggest upset in American political history. Although he trailed Clinton by around 3 million popular votes, he achieved victory in the Electoral College. Overall, the results revealed a sharp divide between rural and small-town America, which is predominantly white in population and suffering economic decline, which Trump carried with large majorities, and the economically thriving, multicultural, large metropolitan areas, which went overwhelmingly for Clinton. Trump won 58% of white voters, but only one-third of Hispanics and 8% of blacks. Clinton carried 54% of women voters, but in a humiliating rebuff, a majority of white women voted for Trump. Trump's victory was part of a global voter revolt against a political establishment that many people blamed for job losses, stagnant wages, and large-scale immigration, all elements of globalization. Throughout the world, strongmen who showed a willingness to dispense with democratic norms and stir up hatreds rooted in national or tribal identity consolidated their authority. In disorienting times, it seemed, many people wanted strong authority figures at the helm of their nation, as well as a secure sense of belonging and national identity. Despite his promise to upend the political system, many of Trump's policies as president were standard conservative Republican fare. Trump's main legislative achievement during his first 2 years in office was a massive tax cut. In keeping with the supply side economic outlook, most of the benefits were directed toward corporations and the wealthiest Americans, on the theory that they would invest the money they saved in economically productive activities and higher wages. But many corporations use their tax windfall not for productive purposes, but rather to buy back their own stock, enriching investors and corporate executives. Wage increases continued to lag behind inflation so that most Americans saw no economic gain. Trump did, however, break with Republican free trade orthodoxy by raising tariffs on goods imported from China, Canada, and the European Union in the hope of promoting American manufacturing. In both foreign and domestic affairs, Trump seemed determined to erase much of Obama's legacy as possible. Despite his party's majorities in both houses of Congress, Trump relied on executive orders, not legislation, to erase many of Obama's initiatives. Early in Trump's presidency, evidence accumulated that the Russian government had interfered in the 2016 election by spreading disinformation on social media and hacking into the email servers of the Democratic National Committee. Russian President Vladimir Putin seemed to have promised Trump's campaign in the hope, or promoted Trump's campaign in the hope that Trump would remove some of the economic sanctions the U.S. and other countries had instituted after Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, a part of the nation of Ukraine. The Justice Department appointed a special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, to determine whether illegal collusion had occurred between Trump's campaign and Russian officials. As time went on, Mueller expanded his investigation to include other forms of campaign malfeasance by a number of people close to the president. Mueller's final report, however, found no evidence that Trump had personally conspired with the Russians, but did suggest that he had attempted to obstruct the investigation. As president, Trump kept up his rhetorical attacks on Mexicans, Muslims, and immigrants more generally, but during 2017 and 2018, when his party controlled both houses of Congress, he failed to convince lawmakers to authorize the building of his border wall or to legislate at all on immigration. Trump had demanded a complete shutdown of Muslim immigration to the United States during the campaign, and one of his first acts as president was to ban travel to the U.S. from a number of Muslim-majority countries. Federal courts blocked the ban as a form of religious discrimination. Eventually, the Supreme Court allowed a watered-down version to go into effect. In the summer of 2018, the administration began removing young children from the custody of parents who had come to the southern border with their families seeking asylum in the United States. The pictures of young children, even toddlers, separated from their parents and held in cage-like structures on abandoned army bases caused an uproar, and a judge ordered the administration to reunite the families. Misinformation abounded in the continuing debate over immigration. Trump repeatedly blamed undocumented immigrants for urban crime, even though their crime rate and that of newcomers legally in the United States was far lower than that of native-born Americans. About 12% of the country's population in 2018 was born abroad, but when asked about the number in polls, Americans gave an average response of 35%. One area in which Trump turned his back not only on Obama's policies, but also on the rest of the world, was his administration's response to the problem of global warming, a slow rise in the Earth's temperature that scientists warn could have disastrous effects on the climate and human life more broadly. Global warming is caused when carbon dioxide released by burning fossil fuels, such as oil and coal, remains in the upper atmosphere, trapping heat reflected from the Earth. Climate change threatens to disrupt long-established patterns of agriculture and lead to a large expansion of the size of the world's deserts. The melting of glaciers and polar ice caps because of rising temperatures will eventually raise ocean levels, flooding coastal cities. Global warming exacerbates the destructiveness of hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters. But while this was not originally a partisan issue, during the 1990s, more and more Republicans came to reject the scientific consensus that human activity causes climate change, and they opposed efforts to promote sources of energy, solar and wind power, for example, that would reduce dependency on oil and coal. In 2017, Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement, making the United States the only country in the world not to commit itself to take steps to reduce emissions that cause climate change. Late in 2018, government scientists issued a report predicting dire consequences, from widespread flooding to ever more intense storms and wildfires and serious crop failures if climate change is not addressed. But the Trump administration continued its efforts to reduce regulations aimed at combating global warming. Trump's unprecedented conduct as a candidate continued in office. He held virtually no press conferences. Instead, he issued a daily barrage of tweets that promoted his ideas and insulted political opponents, critics, and even political allies. Often his tweets had a racial component. The tone set by the president helped to produce a coarsening of public discourse. Trump's presidency exacerbated the intense polarization that had been a feature of politics since Clinton's presidency. Many people were deeply offended by his derogatory remarks about women. On the day after his inauguration, a women's march on Washington brought hundreds of thousands of people to the nation's capital to express their support for women's rights, immigration reform, racial equality, and protection of the environment. Another expression of women's activism, the Me Too movement, brought to light evidence of rampant sexual harassment by entertainment moguls, business leaders, public officials, and other powerful men. With some economic recovery and unemployment at a historic low, a conventional politician would have emphasized economic issues in the midterm elections of 2018, not Trump. In the last weeks of the campaign, he traveled the country, holding rallies where he whipped up fear of immigrants. These appeals consolidated his political base but alienated more moderate voters. With Democrats and many independents galvanized by opposition to Trump's policies and behavior, the elections of 2018 in part reversed the verdict of 2 years earlier. Democrats replaced Republicans in 40 seats in the House of Representatives, regaining control of that body. Trump's policies and demeaning comments regarding women produced a giant gender gap in voting. The gap was even wider among young voters. On the other hand, Republicans increased their majority in the Senate. The 2018 elections revealed other deep divides between rural areas strongly Republican and cities and suburbs dominated by Democrats, and between Republicans almost entirely white and largely male support and the diversity of Democrats. These patterns were reflected in the new House of Representatives. More than 100 women were elected to the body, the most in American history. Of the 42 new women members, 38 were Democrats. Of 23 new people of color elected to Congress, only one was a Republican. Thus, two visions of America clashed, one based on exclusion and whiteness, the other welcoming and diverse. Both were deeply rooted in the American experience. Trump faced new charges in 2019 of soliciting foreign interference to benefit his re-election bid. In a recorded telephone conversation revealed by a CIA whistleblower, Trump pressured Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to open investigations into the Biden family to weaken Joseph Biden, his expected challenger in the 2020 election. If Ukraine did not act, Trump threatened to withhold promised U.S. military aid. When Congress opened an investigation into the incident, Trump instructed members of his administration to refuse to cooperate. On December 17, 2019, after testimony from a number of high-placed officials and diplomats, the House of Representatives found Trump guilty of abuse of power and obstruction of justice. Trump became the third president in U.S. history to be impeached, but the largely partisan vote revealed the deep polarization of the nation and Trump's grip on the Republican Party. The Republican-dominated Senate held only a brief trial and quickly acquitted Trump. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah was the only Republican to vote to convict President Trump. So, that was our fifth section. We'll be back for the sixth.